So I'm Brian Greenan from the Mayor's Office of Economic and Neighborhood Development. I've been focused on the subject area that we'll discuss today for the past 2+ years. I'm the project coordinator for downtown's West Side, much of which has been rechristened as the Bromo Tower Arts and Entertainment District. And just as background for this latest and newest arts and entertainment district in the city of Baltimore, it was established in July 2012 by the Maryland State Arts Council. Some things that have happened since the newly minted Arts and Entertainment District include the Everyman Theater, a renovated $17.5 million performance venue. The city contributed $1.6 million to that project. 8 murals have been completed along and near the Howard Street corridor, which we're going to pour over today, at a cost of $40,000, which was raised by multiple sources. The Deutsch Foundation, among others, the Maryland Transit Administration, the Downtown Partnership, the Franz Marek Foundation, and numerous others. So we're really grateful for the multiple layers of support we've had on all the projects we've done to date in the Bromo district. So today we're going to talk about a very unique development model that comes out of Hamburg, Germany, and Germany proper as well. You'll learn more about IBA, which in English translates as International Building Exposition, which what I would best describe as a real interesting planning and implementation tool that we might want to consider for application along the Howard Street corridor. Not only does it's resulted in 1,200 new units built on the Elbe Islands near downtown Hamburg, and 600 units have been renovated. Existing units were renovated as well, and our partners from Hamburg will talk all about that. So you're going to learn about, basically, as I understand it from my visit last night to College Park for the opening of the exposition, you're going to learn about 2 different and unique projects that have reimagined downtown Hamburg. And we're going to talk about how those projects, the Hafen City project, which I believe in English roughly means Harbor City, and the IBA, the International Building Exposition on the Elbe Islands, how they have reimagined downtown Hamburg. And we're going to talk about the successes and failures of those projects and how those lessons learned might translate to reimagine the Howard Street corridor here on downtown's West Side in the heart of the Bromo Tower Arts and Entertainment District. So I'm going to just thank a few folks, and like any good Oscar speech, I'm going to forget plenty of organizations and agencies, but first of all, I want to thank Wilfried Eckstein from the Goethe Institute. That is the International Institute of Culture, of German culture around the world, and Wilfried is our partner out of Washington in that effort. Wilfried and the Baltimore Office of Promotion of the Arts helped to make all this possible with numerous multiple partners, including the Downtown Partnership, the Mayor's Office, and several others. So, excuse me. So we're really excited about this. This is kind of the kickoff for the transit project to reimagine all of our transit corridors in our 3 arts and entertainment districts: Highlandtown, Station North, and the Bromo district. And what we're doing today is really looking hard at planning and development for that area, and you will see how we begin to roll out an art project, an art and urban design project for the Howard Street corridor later this year and early next year. So today kind of sets the table for expectations and a real reawakening of that corridor. So I want to thank Uli Helwig from the International Building Exposition in Hamburg. He's an architect by training. I want to thank Anka Hansik, the marketing and communications coordinator with the International Building Exposition in Hamburg. And finally, I want to thank Jürgen Bruns-Barentaug of he's managing the Hafen City Hamburg project. And again, that's a very separate project. So you're going to learn all about these 3 individuals today and the tasks they have at hand. And we're going to hear some lessons learned. So I'm very excited to welcome our panel members and to welcome Nan Rohrer, our moderator. And let's go ahead and get started.
We're excited to be here, and want to just thank all of you for attending, and hopefully we can have a great discussion as we move forward, and you all will see some fabulous things that we're hoping to translate for Baltimore and the Howard Street corridor as well. Before we begin, I want to just let everyone know a couple of things. We will be having some question and answer sessions, hopefully in between both panels. If not, we will certainly have one at the very end. We're going to try and do our best to stay on schedule here. And then also I want to let you know that for both of our German visitors today, they have extensive and very thorough websites that are available online, and there's so much more information there, great translations, so please don't think you have to speak German to be able to read them. Some fabulous English information there as well, so I think a lot of your questions would be answered there as well, and just a lot of great detailed information. So with that, and without further ado, I'd love to introduce our very distinguished panel, and we're going to start with Jürgen Bruns-Berntaug. Jürgen, if you can just, yep, there is, so you know who's who. Since 2003, Jürgen has been Chief Executive Officer of the Hafen City Hamburg GmbH, a public company owned by the City of Hamburg, charged with the development of Hafen City. Bruns-Berntaug is thus responsible for one of the world's most important city waterfront projects. The eventual goal is that Hafen City will represent an enduring quality of the inner city as a public good that is outstanding worldwide. Before his involvement with Hafen City, Jürgen Bruns-Berntaug occupied management positions with British, American, and German property companies, sometimes at the executive board and board of director levels. In the process, he was also involved in major projects such as Berlin Central Station or the Sony Center in Potsdamer Platz, Berlin. Jürgen studied geography and biology, and he is also a real estate economist. He publishes regularly on questions of urban development. Uli Helwig is the managing director of IBA. As managing director of the state-owned Wasserstadt in Berlin, the architect and city planner is responsible for the conversion of 253 hectares of former industrial and harbor premises on the banks of the Spree and Havel rivers. In Berlin, Helwig also had his first experiences with IBA. During the International Building Exhibition 1984-87, he was responsible for managing pilot projects for the renovation of older buildings. And from 1992 to 1996, Uli Helwig worked as the planning director in Kassel. In 2001, he was commissioned to build the Luxembourgian French development body, Agora SARL, which is responsible for the redevelopment of 600 hectares of former industrial premises. Under his direction, 130 hectares of steel industrial premises were transformed into locations for the first Luxembourgian university, as well as for housing and offices. Helwig was also involved in a different large-scale project in Hamburg as early as 1998 when he was chairman of the jury of a competition of realization concepts for the development of Hafen City. Wendy Blair is an experienced real estate development professional with a Bachelor of Arts from Amherst College and has a Master's of Public Administration from the NYU Graduate School of Public Administration. She established W.L. Blair Development, LLC, to oversee the redevelopment of the multifamily apartment building, now called St. James Place, at the corner of Howard and Franklin Streets in the Bromo Arts District. She's also worked with Kington Commercial to expand her practice in the area of real estate brokerage. Charlie Duff is the president of Jubilee Baltimore, and in his 30 years, he and Jubilee have planned extensive parts of the central city and have developed approximately $150 million of projects, including the restoration of hundreds of historic homes, many of which are also in the Station North Arts District. Arts and Entertainment District. Brenda McKenzie was appointed as president and CEO of the Baltimore Development Corporation by Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake in December of 2012. With a hyper-focus on encouraging investment in Baltimore's economy, McKenzie has over 20 years of experience in the community development arena, including development finance, community revitalization, branding, asset management, and public affairs. Expertise which was previously used at the Boston Redevelopment Authority and in neighborhood development for the city of Chicago. As president and CEO of BDC, McKenzie's role is simple: encourage investment and growth in the city's economy. BDC acts as a catalyst in the creation of a robust and sustainable economy for the city of Baltimore through job creation by the retention, expansion, and attraction of businesses, and through the revitalization of its neighborhoods by encouraging growth and investment throughout the city in an exclusive and sustainable manner. And finally, Tom Stosur established his planning career in Baltimore in 1987 at the Baltimore City Planning Department. Since February of 2009, Tom has been serving as the city's planning director, where he is fortunate to work with a staff of 40 professionals who are dedicated to making this city a thriving and sustainable place to live, learn, play, and earn. Tom holds a Master's of Regional Planning from Cornell University and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Boston College. So if we could just welcome our panel, they're a great group. So at this point, we would like for our Hamburg panelists to give you a brief overview of their projects. The screen is over to your left, so hopefully you all can see that. Okay. So Jürgen Bruns-Berntaug will go ahead and start, and as previously stated, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Hafen City Hamburg.
But I first like to thank very much every one of you who's been coming to this meeting, but also listening to the discussions yesterday we have, for all those bringing us up to date yesterday on the tour, and specifically Wilfried Eckstein, who has been supporting very much our presence here in Baltimore yesterday, and also Brian Greenway, who has been very supportive of our presence and has provided yesterday with quite a number of insights. But a caveat is necessary. We do not know much about Baltimore. We are looking at Baltimore from the perspective of Hamburg. And while there are a lot of differences when we are talking about what is happening in the Howard Corridor and what is happening in Hafen City, let me draw a few lines of similarity, at least in terms of starting points for our later discussion. Only an indication for those who are not familiar with Hamburg. Hamburg has now a population of about 1.8 million within the city boundaries. The metropolitan area is roughly 5 million. It's in the northern part of Germany, roughly 300 kilometers of Berlin, and is the second largest German city. Economic drivers are very strong. One of the biggest ports in the world, still the second most important in Europe. Civil aviation industry, strong industry, and a strong mixed-use economy. As you can see, the city has been growing in terms of population. It is a place where the renaissance of the city is taking place. And what is related to the issue of Hafen City, to explain that in a few minutes, is that this area is expanding the core of the inner city by roughly 40%. The decision was made in 1997. It is adjacent to the Elbe River on the northern part, and we have developed and decided upon a master plan in the year 2000. It's an area of 157 hectares, almost 400 acres, and a waterfront of 10.5 kilometers. The important point in terms of importance is that it is expanding the inner city area. As you have seen, the red circle is where City Hall is that it expands the central city area by more than 40%. And that generates tremendous importance in terms of redefining what an expansion of the central city area could be. We're talking about 45,000 jobs, 10,000 have been generated, 6,000 homes will be built, and a lot of cultural buildings, public spaces, university buildings, and a lot more, 12,000 residents. We are almost halfway through. Half of the sites have been allocated. Almost 40% has been built, so we are in our timeline. So it's an intermediate, so to say, view at the present moment we are discussing, and the total investment volume, private and public, is almost 18 billion euro, depending on 2.3 million euros gross square meter gross floor area built anew. What is different with regard to Howard Street corridor is that it is a very radical transformation of the space, a former harbor space, because it has to be alleviated to 8 meters above sea level so that we avoid any future flooding risk and it had been partly highly contaminated. The sites, for example, were also covered by non-valuable sheds and other buildings. So it is not a loss in terms of urban identity as long as the harbor basins are preserved. This is, so to say, a mosaic picture of what Hafen City looks like today. Major office buildings, Unilever headquarter buildings, red brick buildings, which are relating in terms of identity to the existing city, public spaces, linear form, densely built housing areas, a big cultural building, the Elbphilharmonie on top of a historical storage building, 110 meters high, but also a building like this one, which is a community of Christian churches, 19 Christian churches, which are generating a spiritual center of Hafen City. You could actually say it is something like a city in the city, although we do not want to be a separate part. It actually includes all the elements of a city. So what could one learn from Hafen City development, although the conditions are completely different? Let me start out with a very simple element which says basically start small but fast. Fast is an important element because fast is an element of visibility and convincing people and partners and the people within the city, the democratic electorate, actually that something is happened, that it is not only a vision, but that it is a place which is physically transformed. For a big project, for Howard Street and even for Hafen City, though, it is very important to start small. Why that? That sounds a little bit as a paradox. The important point is that starting small has a number of advantages. It has the advantage that we are able to lower the risk in the first phase of the development. We are in a position, for example, to spread out the risk of private development. When you have a new site, for example, these buildings are only 3,500 to 4,000 square meters. These are very unique and small for Hafen City development, but they produce a low risk for new investments in a new place, in a place-making strategy. So in order to convince market participants, it is important to have an ideal starting point, not only spatially, but in terms of risk reduction. And what we did is also spreading out the risk, because this could have easily been done by one developer. It's important to do that, probably in our view, by 8 developers. So 8 developers participated in the development of this small section and then continued with bigger buildings and even bigger ones. And you can easily see this would have been a prime location for a big development company, but it is still vacant because we said we want to integrate and link to the existing city space and develop, so to say, a coherent spatial integrated starting area, a comprehensive area for the development. And what is also important that you include part of, so to say, the potential general benefits for the city, public spaces or identity generating elements like a traditional harbor in the harbor basin. So show all the elements you want to show at the start phase if possible. And what is also important, that this allows not only for additional public goods elements, but that it should also show the core investment qualities. And we have 50% offices and 50% residential. So the mixture of uses we want to achieve has been achieved at the beginning. So central messages, fast and convincingly in an integrated way that they can serve as an extension of the inner city, have been very important elements of the lesson of Hafen City. Another element is that to develop, so to say, a communicative capital. I say this in a more academic way because I think if we would talk about branding, it would be short-sighted. If we would be talking only about a strategy which would be defining a market perception of the area, it would be short-sighted. And the important point is to integrate different elements. We have, for example, an information center, starting at the beginning for public meetings with a big physical model where people which do not like to read can really see, touch the space the way it has to be changed. But beyond that, it is important that network organization of people are established, not only of organization, that they start to respond to this process, and that it is actually an interaction process which is taking place, and that's why we call that communicative capital formation. It's not only branding, but it is transforming an idea into the mental perception of people living in the area and beyond that, not limiting that to maybe 50 institutions or 5 institutions or those which are important. It is important to have a physical vision of the space. I do not want to explain that, but it is important that there is a physical quality of the space that, for example, as you have seen here on the slide, that there is a perception of the streets of Howard Street and the vicinity. What will they look like in 5 or 10 years? What will happen? What kind of parking will there be? What kind of green will there be? What kind of walkability will there be? What kind of material will be used? All these questions must be transformed into a visible perception step by step, and it is important to start out with public spaces. From our experience, that has been very, very important, because we know that not all people can from Hamburg can live or work in Hafen City. It is important to set up a spatial system, but also a social and a cultural system using the public space and also an everyday use, and that has been very successful. And also what I have been seeing to a certain degree, and I'm not sure whether it is missing, maybe because the assumption is that families will not move into that area, setting up the social institutions that families are an important element. You might say, well, families will never move into that area. Our experience has been, in 2003, when I started, I was told no one will want to live in the harbor area. And when we showed that people were wanting to live in the harbor area, after 5 years, everyone said, well, yeah, people will live in the harbor area, but no families. And then there was a school built, and now on average, we have a higher average of families with small children in Hafen City than in the average of the city. The cultural perception of people and young households changes tremendously in favor of inner city locations, but only if they have the chance to raise children, if there are parks available, if there are schools, primary schools available. We are now building the second one. If there are kindergarten services available, and if the children are participating, for example, in planning processes here like those in the park. You also have to look into social structure and cohesion issues. I mentioned that, for example, the Economical Forum. And an important element is mobility. I'm not saying transport. I'm saying mobility on purpose, because we are not talking only about physical infrastructure. We are not talking about catchment areas. We talk about a change in the social perception of the inner city. And it is a bike place, it is a walking place, it is a place, Hafen City in this case, where you can move by boat, where you can move by subway, and Howard Corridor has all these potential elements available. Not maybe at the right quality, but it has it available. And when we And for example, here you see, so to say, fuel cell operated buses. You could set up a bus system, for example, which is a lot less noisy than the one we experienced, and so on, for the inner city. That is an important element to come up with an environment where people can live, where residential development can take place, and these are elements. And yesterday in the discussion we were told, well, people can live outside Baltimore less costly than an apartment would cost in the inner city. That may be true, but the decisive point is also that is also true for Hafen City. But add mobility cost and timing to your residential living cost, and then it becomes very interesting if you have a mobility system like that, allowing you a lot of choices that the individual budget of the household, time-wise and economically, changes dramatically in favor of the inner city location. We could prove that, and the people are moving into the inner city if the right quality in terms of residential development and mobility are created. I will not talk about those other points, but let me mention one final aspect. It is tremendously important in a project like IBA, but also in a project like Hafen City, to have a management and decision-making structure which is comprehensive and which is realization-oriented. We do the financing, we are doing the development planning, we are the owners of the land before we sell it, so don't sell too fast, but at the right point in time. We are developing the public spaces, we are doing the marketing, and so on. And I have sociologists, cultural specialists, engineers, and all the whole range of people in the company to bring the different aspects together which are needed for the transformation of a space. And the more difficult a transformation is, the more it is necessary to bring all these different aspects together and not to have the different columns of the city work separately on the same project. The coordination task cannot be successful. The private sector could then concentrate on what the private sector can do best. It can develop individual projects and not do, for example, significant development of infrastructure and other activities. So you need a very strong and expansive role of the Hafen City Hamburg, or, for example, Baltimore Development Corporation as a quango, not only restricted, in my view, to real estate activities, but also to the whole range of urban development issues, which cannot only be related to land. Thank you very much for your patience.
Yes, thank you so much, Jürgen. And now Uli Helwig, who's with IBE Hamburg, is going to tell us a little bit about his project.
Thank you, Dan, for this kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here. We had a great day yesterday. We had a walk on the west side, and this was very inspiring for us. We appreciated that very much, and I would like to thank all those who made this possible, especially Wilfried Eckstein, Brian Greenan, and the colleagues from the Downtown Partnership. This was a great experience yesterday. Thanks a lot. So I will take you on the other side of the Elbe River. But first, let me give you a brief information about what is an international building exhibition, because international building exhibitions are rather unusual formats, even in Germany, even in Europe. We are the 8th international building exhibition since 1901, and what is specific for an international building exhibition is that it is not a mere exhibition. It is always dealing with a certain site, with a certain urban area, and it is always trying to address, to tackle the issues and to bring model solutions for this specific urban area. And so there is a strong relationship between the area and the topics an international dealing exhibition is dealing with. And these topics it is dealing with always are supposed to have an international dimension. That is the reason why it is called International Building Exhibition. But what is very important as well is that you have certain governance prerequisites for an international building exhibition. That means, for example, that you have a certain amount of money available in order to foster the processes, in order to subsidize projects and to initiate projects. And another feature of the governance element is that you have only a certain period of time available. That means you have only between 7, 8, maximum 10 years available, and then you have to finish. And then you have to brought results to a certain point so that the business you have done can be transferred to the regular authorities of the community or to a development corporation or to other departments of the authority. And what is essential for an international building exhibition in the end are always the projects, because the project, it is an exhibition as well. It is a driver of urban development, it is a laboratory for new projects, for new technologies, for new social procedures and so on. But at the end, you have to show that it is possible to change a location, to modify a location by projects. That is essential. So, as I mentioned before, we are always dealing with a certain area, and this is the area we are dealing with. It is immediately adjacent to Hafen City, which is on the north side of the Elbe River, and we are on the south side, so that's why I said I'll take you on a trip to the south side of the Elbe River. It is an area of 35 square kilometers where 55,000 people live. And if you go more in details, you see some essential, crucial obstacles, constraints concerning this area. For example, you have major harbor uses in the west and in the north. You have major traffic arteria slicing the area, creating obstacles between the different neighborhoods. And in addition, this is an island. We always say it is the largest fluvial island in Europe, but it's not so important. But it is a fluvial island, and that is important, formed out of an archipelago of more than 20 small islands. That means this is an artificial island formed out of this archipelago and is protected by flood protection measures, dikes and other things, because Hamburg is open to the tide of the North Sea. And this is, of course, a struggle against the water from the sea, and this struggle hasn't been always successful. In 1962, the dikes broke and more than 200 people died in the flood. And of course, you can imagine the issue of climate change is a constant concern here on the island, because when sea level rise and so on, when storm surges increase, what would that mean for the Elbe Islands? And then there is a third issue we are dealing with. We are dealing with the social structure. Because due to the fact that the Elbe Island is so heavily affected by big industries, traffic arterias and so on, and has been affected by floods and storm surges, a lot of middle-class people left the island and migrant people moved into the island. And that brought us to a situation where we have 2/3, or in some quarters 80% of the population has a migrant background and is poor, both. And the German population, their living is as well poor. So we are not dealing with the sunny side of Hamburg, we are dealing with the backyard of Hamburg. And so in 2006, the International Building Exhibition has been installed as a company. And as I mentioned before, governance is one of the major features of an international building exhibition. And this building exhibition company is supposed to exist 7 years, from 2006 to 2013. This is a period of time we have available to modify, to change the island. And perhaps this is a traditional construction of companies in Germany. You have a supervisory board, of course, and this is our staff. Our staff are about 30 colleagues. From all kinds of professions, urban planners, socialists, and so on, and so on. And we have an international advisory board, which is very important for us to bring us always on the best practice level, on the benchmark of best practice in the world. For example, from the US, we have Saskia Sassen in our board from Boston. And then we have special advisory boards for special things, for social issues, and in this case, for example, for energy issues, for climate issues, with the best people in this field in Germany. So we have consultants really from the most advanced scientific level, at least in Germany. And then we have an institutional network of citizens and institutions that support us, not only from the Elbe Islands, but from the whole Hamburg territory. And then, of course, what plays an important and really crucial role is citizen participation, because we have to need to integrate the existing population, as I mentioned before, 55,000 people, and you can't make an urban planning against them. You have to integrate them. This is once again the area, and I want to give you seven points of our tasks and responsibilities we are dealing with, and I want to give only one or two examples how to deal with that responsibility. The first is the development of a comprehensive urbanistic approach. Our deal is not to make a master plan and to implement it. Our deal is to make a comprehensive concept, and our task is to be open for modifications. We don't know exactly what we will have at the end of the 7 years. We know we have to be successful, and everybody expects it, especially the politicians. But we don't know exactly what we will have, because we are open for learning. That is very, very important. If you are not dealing with a green field or with other things, if you are dealing with people, if you are dealing with an existing area, you have to be open for learning processes. And so we made, this was the initial activity was to make a development, to make a comprehensive urbanistic concept and to discuss this with the people. For example, this concept comprises what we call the education drive. This is a concept to improve educational conditions in the area, mainly for the migrant population, but also for the people new coming to the area. Or for example, regarding the climate issue, we developed a concept that is called Renewable Wilhelmsburg, and in this concept we showed how it is possible to convert Wilhelmsburg into a completely CO2 neutral area in terms of housing, not in terms of industry and traffic, but in terms of housing. And though population is supposed to increase by 40%, we will be nearly CO2 neutral in power supply by the end of the 20s. Up from that point, we will produce more energy on a regenerative basis than we need. And we will be CO2 neutral in terms of heating at the end of the 40s. That means that in the field of the housing sector, we will be nearly CO2 neutral by the end of the midst of the century. And we implemented a large part of the way to this goal. So the second task we are dealing with is defining principal concepts and key projects for the area. So we analyzed the area, we discussed the issues with the people, and then we felt what are the major challenges. And what we felt was, for example, that people feared to be to get a gentrification process that would lead to a level of rents that they couldn't afford in future. And so what was the first project we tackled? We tackled a project to prove that it is possible to make urban retrofitting and urban renewal without triggering gentrification processes. For example, this is a workers' residential area where people from more than 40 nations live, low-income people, and we made a plan with them, a retrofitting plan, and that has already been realized. And everybody who wanted to stay in the area could stay in the area, and they are now living in a retrofitted house, and they are happy. And of course, this was very important for us, so that we got another credibility. So. This is a new project in the center of the island, and here once again it is not a master plan. We established an intervention plan, and that what you see are all different interventions. For example, a climbing hall, a swimming hall, a new urban railway station because the old one was very derelict, and so on. And this intervention plan has been realized. Not at all. Not all the things had been realized, but the most things had been realized until 2013, so that the process can go on in future. The fourth task we are dealing with is planning and implementing of infrastructure and open space. This is the key to improve existing areas that are suffering from derelict processes and declining quality. And so, for example, we improved an existing school center to an education center. That it is how it looks like today, with a grammar school, with a kindergarten, with a language remedial school, a new elementary school, a sports center, and a civic center for the people, a community center for the people, with theater and a cafe and so on. And that it is how it looks like today. It came to use in this spring, this year. Or this, for example, is another education project where we especially dealing with the task of language training for young migrant children before they enter school. Because we have the problem in Germany when the young migrants enter school, they are not able to speak German, and then they get a lot of problems for the rest of their life, you can say. And so we built this center here where sport activities, where exercises are combined with language training. So because it is well known in the education sector that people that move a lot, that make sports and gym and so on, can better learn a foreign language. So this facility is completely dedicated to this aspect of education. Or some other things, more conventional things like a swimming hall and so on. And what was very important as well is an infrastructure for the existing population there. For example, a senior citizens' home for migrant seniors suffering from dementia. Or the open space. All what you see here in dark green are new open spaces. Open space is a key for urban improvement of this kind of areas. Or to diminish, to reduce urban obstacles by improving, for example, new bridges over the railway track, or new cycle paths and connections to Hafen City, which is over here in the north, and other measures to reduce barriers, to reduce impediments. Fifth, initiating support in private investment. This is a figure I want to show you. We had a budget available of 90 million euros from the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg. in order to trigger all these processes. We acquired another 30 million euros from the European Union. This is about $145 million. And this is the overall sum we had available for the 7 years. And we triggered more than 1 billion euros private and public investment with this money until 2013. But 2013 is only the presentation year. The process of urban renewal and building the city anew will continue. And we expect another 1 billion euros on private investment until 2020. What was very important was to enable the people living in the area to build associations, building what we called building groups, so that they can create their own ownership, on the one hand regarding the existing housing stock, or here in this case build new buildings, very efficient new buildings on the basis of a common financing, so that they could afford the rents and the housing. This is another community project. 6, realizing of innovative model projects. We are an exhibition, we are in a building exhibition, and we regard these derelict areas, these backyards of the city, as a potential for the most innovative, for the most modern new city. That is the approach, and that is our that is what we claim. And so, for example, we realized water houses. These are houses that can adapt to changing water levels due to stormwater events, for example. Or we realized what we call hybrid houses. That means houses that can adapt to the shifting needs of the people, where multi-generation living is possible, where working and living is possible, so that the house adapt to the needs of the people, and not the other way around, as it is normal, that if your needs shift, you have to move away, you have to look for another apartment. Or, for example, smart material houses that deal with very innovative new energetic techniques, so that all these houses produce more energy than they use by themselves, for example, by producing algae. In this facade, algae are harvested, and these algae are used in a biogas plant to produce energy, storable energy. Or here, a project of Wiley and Kennedy from Boston with flexible photovoltaic textiles in the roof, so that they are very, very efficient houses. Or smart price houses, houses that could be afforded by most of the people living in the area. And these are houses that are a third cheaper in costs than the Hamburg average. Okay, these are other experiences. I don't want to go too much in detail. Perhaps this is important because I mentioned the climate issue. And I mentioned that we made a concept where we showed how it is possible to convert Wilhelmsburg into a CO2 neutral urban district. This is one of our key projects. This is a former bunker that had been converted in a regenerative power plant fed by solar thermal energy and waste energy of an adjacent industry. And the last point, finally, initiating and fostering of cultural activities and participation. That is rather similar what you are doing on the west side. So that's the same approach we realized in Wilhelmsburg. We made spaces available for artists. But what perhaps is a little, maybe a difference, I don't know, but that was my impression yesterday. We don't regard artists as an intermediate use. We regard them as a final users. So this is, for example, an artist center. You see that here. This a former industry, cables and so on had been produced, and we gave them for 30 years. not for 3 years or not for 1 year, for 30 years. So we enable them to make long-term investments as well. This is this building before it has been retrofitted, very beautifully situated here on the canal. And, or for example, we give premises to students, and this is indeed an intermediate project. This is a project of Hafen City University for architects, and we gave it to them for the whole period of the IBA, for the 7 years, and every generation of students is working on this premise, and they are doing what they want to do. There's only one condition, it is called University of the Neighborhood. They always have to deal with the neighborhood. Every year they have to submit us a concept how they want to deal with the neighborhood in that year. But in that framework they can do what they want. And even in terms of building permission, we are very liberal in this case. So these are other forms of integration. This is a project for young migrant start-up enterprises under a roof of photovoltaic panels, 3,500 meters. We have units for 30 start-up enterprises, and these are different groups that I mentioned before that are involved in the participation process. This is a final overview over what we accomplished until 2013, more than 60 projects. And you see, these are the 1,200 units Brian mentioned earlier. And these are the different infrastructure. And this is what I meant when I said that we developed a comprehensive approach. Thanks a lot.
Great, fabulous. Both just incredible projects. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have actually been to Hamburg and seen either of these projects? No? Okay, I'll tone it down. Who all has been to Hamburg? We'll start there. It's one of my favorite German, probably that and Berlin, my two faves. So what we'd like to do is just take a few minutes, and as one of our panelists pointed out earlier, they didn't have a ton of time to really get to know Baltimore, obviously on a tight schedule, but just wanted to get a couple of your impressions from the walk yesterday, the tour, and discuss a little bit what you saw yesterday, and I will leave it to the two of you as to who would like to start with that.
Well, I think I tried to develop a few linkages between what we saw yesterday and to develop ideas with regard to Hafen City, and I think there are a number of issues which I am, from my professional background, not familiar with, but from the issues which we are dealing with in Hafen City, I think there are some very important points to be discussed. I was surprised in the first place how deteriorated certain areas of Howard Street were, how deteriorated the urban infrastructure was, how vacated it was from population and also from social infrastructure. Schools have been closed down, transformed, for example. But I also saw that there is a significant lack, for example, of architectural coherence and quality of newer buildings which have been set up. The publicly related uses at ground floor partly have been undermined in some new projects, which we would think is crucial for either public safety, for use of retail, gastronomy, exhibition spaces, and so on. There is a certain tendency, due to, I think, security reasons, to exclude residential living from the interaction between and the streetscape, and a number of other issues where I think there should be a general view, as Uli Helwig has been discussing, about an architectural and design framework for the public spaces in general, for the streetscape, how it can be greened, how parking can be integrated, how delivery could be integrated. But I think the most important point is how to mobilize actually residential development. And I think the branding of this area should be further developed into a strategic view on residential development. I think cultural aspects are extremely important, but at the end of the day, the project's success depends on the possibility to make it successful as a residential space. And I do not see enough development in this area at the present moment to be successful at that level.
I think this is a great area. I think it has a great architecture, a great quality in architecture. It has great potential in urban qualities concerning the ground floor uses, for example. It has great prerequisites regarding, for example, the university adjacent, the different theaters, the artists, the proximity to downtown or to the harbor circle and so on. So there are great prerequisites for an urban development. And I think, of course, it is a little bit a matter of strategic procedures, how to intervene and what are the right key measures to bring public awareness and the awareness of investors and perhaps of more artists on the area. And I think one should deal with some problems that are obvious. And this is, for example, the matter of parking space, parking lots. There are too much parking lots. There are open spaces, there are infills, or there are potential infills, very important corners that are used as parking lots. That's impossible. That is how it doesn't go. Then you have, for example, a lot of one-way roads. Why? The one-way roads are very fast. They impede the development of ground floor uses. They impede people to cross the street. And of course, then you have problems in the shape of the street. I'm not really convinced that the fact that there is a light railway is a problem. I think the fact how it is there is a problem. And how the light railway look like. Jürgen yesterday said that is not a light railway, that is a heavy railway. And that is absolutely the point he made. So if you are dealing with modern light railways, with big windows, and not only these small things, and in terms of noise, very comfortable. And there is a technology available regarding trams, light railways, that is much more advanced than that was what is running there. So I think these are only some impressions. That is not systematically. I beg you to apologize that, but that was some first impressions.
Thank you both so very much. I think there are a number of folks in the audience who would probably agree with you on various points, if not in some cases all of those points. So we'd like to start with Tom Stosur, our Director of Planning for the City of Baltimore. Tom, can you talk a little bit about the history of the planning process and the strategic planning around Howard Street with the audience, and kind of what were some of the outcomes and recommendations of those various processes over the years?
Sure, and the history is a rather long one in the case of Howard Street, all the different planning processes that have taken place. Most recently, the ULI Urban Land Institute report, there was a very extensive, maybe week-long concentrated charrette process, study process with a group of national experts focused on Howard Street and the entire West Side. And they published a report a couple of years ago, and it is amazing how your walkthrough yesterday afternoon reflects so much of the recommendations that came out. Your impressions that you've just given us really, I think, capture a lot of the essence of what the main obstacles and the main potential recommendations might be for turning the area around. And prior to that, there's a very lengthy history of planning initiatives, urban renewal plans, investments that, back when the light rail first began to link the corridor, make that a major linkage to the stadiums and beyond for the light rail infrastructure. And at the time, that was, back in the late 80s, coming to fruition in the early 90s. The corridor had already experienced decades of disinvestment at that point, with the department stores really relocating in a major way, and their market moved to the suburbs, so did all their retail outlets, and we were left with pretty massive buildings that did not have immediate replacement uses. So it really has been a long, arduous journey, and in the more recent past, we've held out the hope of some larger redevelopment projects, such as Lexington Square, really providing a major spark to get the area going again and be a catalyst for other smaller projects to take place. And it's a major disappointment on many levels that project did not come to fruition after many, many years of planning and approval processes, negotiations, and it just really could not kind of get over that final hump of getting financing. But in the end, it may not be so bad, because I really think my observations as planning director, we have so much investment coming downtown now in the form of residential projects and mixed-use projects, and I couldn't agree more that from my perspective, viewing Howard Street in the lens of making it, and the West Side in general, a great place for people to live, if you can do that and make sure there's a balance of incomes, and I think it's set up to kind of promote that, really, other great things will follow if you can get those folks actually living and hopefully working and shopping right in the downtown area. It's really going to be, I think, the major piece, and we're already down that road a good ways, both in specific projects in the Howard Street corridor as well as in the larger area of downtown, and building off of those anchors like the university is really going to make a big difference. And finally, the whole question, and I like the way you put it in the presentation, of mobility versus transit. I think that's an important consideration. We need to make the area very, very friendly and accessible for pedestrians, bikers, bus riders, light rail riders, and I think we will take a major leap forward, if you will, on the transit side once the red line is confirmed and we're feeling more and more confident about that east-west rail line coming to Baltimore. And to me, that will add value to every other single rail line and rail station area in the whole system, because it's going to increase the connectivity, and someone could live on Howard Street and work at Bayview or work at the Social Security Administration in Baltimore County, and right now, and not have to have a car. And right now, that's not possible. So.
And to our Hamburg colleagues, essentially, Tom has really hit the nail on the head, and I think this is a complaint that we hear often, is that the area really has been studied and then studied again and planned again. Do you, either of you, from your extensive backgrounds, not only in Hamburg, but throughout your career, have suggestions for the city of Baltimore and for us as a community as to how to really take it from the planning position into the actuality and to the development and implementation, whether it's the housing or the infrastructure or the community building itself?
Now let me start. I think there should be an implementation and realization agency for the area, because it is necessary to bring all the different aspects on mobility, on housing, on cultural aspects, on physical development together in a very comprehensive way, and to deal with the private market. And there is only one possibility to do that when it becomes very complex and complicated. And there is an evolutionary approach with constant learning necessary. That is to incorporate that in a company that produces a dedicated perspective for the area for a certain period. I would think not a short period. 7 years would not be sufficient, like IBA, for the transformation, in my view, maybe 15 years. And I think in principle, you have a company doing that with the Baltimore Development Corporation, but I think in general, the development corporations, as far as I know them in the United States, I do not know the Baltimore one at all, should be set up in a broader way, as we are working at the present moment, dealing with quite a number of different issues, and be very much not only, so to say, as a legal organizer, a financial organizer, but as an implementation agency over all the different ranges of the activity. And that generates in a certain period of time the tipping point process. And I think you have been investing money, you have been investing intellectual capital, but I think the decisive point has not been to come into the implementation, so to say, to set up an organization strong enough to be committed to this place, to make it, so to say, a success, or to make it, so to say, a life and death question for the organization to be successful. And only if you have that commitment to a place, to say it, so to say, a little bit drastically, then you will be able to transform a place which has so much potential, but which has also a lot of difficulties.
Yeah, I would agree completely with what Jürgen said. Perhaps an additional aspect is, I think it is very important to give some signal investments, to give some signals to the people living there, but also signals to the people who should be attracted in future. And for example, in the case of the IBA Hamburg, that was the removal from the Central Ministry of Urban Development and Environment from the inner city area to Wilhelmsburg. That was 10 years ago. It was unimaginable, and there was not only a few oppositions from the employees in the ministry when they heard that they should move to Wilhelmsburg. But there was a strong political will from the political side. It was a proposal from the IBA, and it was a little bit a guerrilla tactic, because we discussed it with the Senate on one Thursday in 2008, and in their weekend session, the Senate decided to move to Wilhelmsburg in 4 days, or 3 days. And then
Point out that the Senate is the city council.
City council, the minister.
The city government. Senate sounds like the federal government to us, but you mean the city government.
The city government.
Yes.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah.
And in Monday morning, the responsible city councillor came before the press and showed the picture we gave him on Thursday and said that is our future location. And of course this was a strong signal, and you need such stories. You have to tell stories about, you have to create stories about the area, and so that's only perhaps an additional aspect.
Brenda, what are some of the existing economic strengths in the district, and what are some of the possible challenges to economic development and its growth here?
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. The area has so many strengths, but, you know, it's kind of a double-sided coin, I guess I should say, and that some of the things that could be perceived as strengths can also be perceived as weaknesses, and I think our panelists and friends from Germany were some of the first comments that you mentioned speak to that. Transit, I think, is a particular strength in this area. I'm relatively new to Baltimore. Certainly we're looking to grow our transportation or mobility resources, but in terms of what's existing today, this is an area that is relatively rich, comparatively speaking. There's some aesthetic things that obviously that can be worked on, and that's the other side of the coin, as it were. So in terms of transit and being able to move from one place to another, there's certainly some inherent advantages or assets to this part of the city. Also, there's a certain amount of walkability that's inherent to this portion of the city. The closeness to job centers and opportunities, the closeness to hospitals, large employers, anchors, cultural resources, the harbor. These are all things that are very walkable, easy to get to, and dare I say, if you have a bike, you can even get to more and more places. So this is something that's very livable. As we're focusing on growing the city, obviously one of the cohorts that is key to that growth are millennials and also boomers, of which I'm neither. Anyway, so with those two cohorts, what we find is that they are a little bit more open to not totally relying on a car, so that also speaks to the parking lots, and the parking lots that were mentioned are also resources, because when you're talking about an area that's close to the core, close to downtown, land comes up. So the idea that we have so much land that's available for development, for positive development, where you don't have to look at displacing or moving one group or one use out to get another one in, that is something that's highly desirable and a really nice asset for the city. But for the cohorts that we're looking for the growth, and this is, in the past couple of years, we've really changed the growth trajectory in the city and are starting to move up in terms of population after 50 years of going down in population. We really need to think about the assets that attract those. So we find that millennials are interested in living close to downtown, boomers are interested in living close to downtown, and I keep saying living, which gets back to the other point that how long have you been in town? You seem to have nailed so many of the key assets. A day and a half. So in a day and a half they've nailed it. But another key area is living, and really what you need to do is start to introduce more and more housing opportunities. Certainly my fellow panelist here has started to do that, and we thank you. And we're looking for more people to do that, and for actually Wendy to continue on her work in doing that, because that's how we get to change the trajectory of the area. The more we have people living downtown or close to downtown, the easier it is to attract the restaurateurs, the easier it is to attract the retailers, the vibrancy at the street level that folks want to see and see it grow. So there are some natural attributes here. At the moment, if you just drive by or if you walk by really quickly, those can be some of the things that you think really don't look so good, but that's the fuel that we need in order to grow and to make that change. So I'm pretty positive.
Thank you. Gentlemen, obviously you just mentioned for IBA, you know, the commitment of the government to locate one of the ministries there was certainly an enormous success for you all. In both of your respective projects, what would you say were some of the economic assets that you did already have that you were able to use as kind of anchors for the future development and growth of your respective projects?
I think in terms of Hafen City, it was not the issue of a physical anchor, but it was a setup of the financing structure. The basic and fundamental aspect has been that the land in the area has been transferred to our company as a special asset, and that that we were asked to generate value from the land and use the value of this land not to increase the income from the city, but on the other hand, to improve the infrastructure, the social infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of the area. So we were relatively independent to progress in terms of supplying the city space with what it needed, and on the other hand, to cream off the benefits at the income flow from the sale of the private properties. That was, so to say, this fundamental circular business model was very helpful. Second element was naturally the decision to build a subway into the area, because port areas usually are completely disjoint from the existing urban fabric. And that was naturally completely different than in Howard case. We were very proximate to the city center, but the transport linkages had to be established in the first place, and for example generating bridges, widening streetscapes, and building the subway was fundamental for the spatial integration, and that was, so to say, two fundamental aspects for being successful at the end of the day. All the other projects were brilliant and interesting projects of high importance, but they came later. The third point was probably sending the signal to people living and wanting to live there was to build the school.
Well, the approach in the field of IBA was a little bit different. The first, of course, already has been mentioned, was the commitment, the public commitment with the ministry. The second was the investment in infrastructure. That is rather similar to Aachen City, but with another connotation, because the connotation in the field of infrastructure in the framework of IBA was that we had a double goal. The first goal was to improve the situation for the existing population there, and to create an adaptive infrastructure. An adaptive infrastructure adjusted to their needs and wishes. And the second goal in this double goal system, let me say, was to create such a high quality standard of schools that it could attract new people coming to the area, because the area was left by all the middle-class people in the decades before. So this was very important in the field of infrastructure. And then the open space aspect in the infrastructure is so extremely important, because if you have such ugly areas like parking lots. Sorry. Not parking lots at all, but in certain places. Of course, you need parking lots. There's no doubt about that. But there are places that doesn't fit to this use. They fit very well for open spaces and for public uses, but not for parking lots. And you have to define these specific areas. And so this was a very important intervention. And the third and last point, finally, was that, and that is the difference to Hafen City, that we had this 120 million euros available, and we used 30 million euros for driving the company and for all the presentation years and for public relation and marketing, and that is necessary as well, because you have to brand the area. But we had 90 million euros available to trigger private investment. And with this 90 million euros, of course, this is an incentive similar to reducing the price of land. At the end of the story, it is the same result. But it is much more effective to use the money directly and steer it to a certain goal and target. And what we did is that we steered this money to the goal to build the most innovative houses, at least in Hamburg, at least in Germany. That means houses with very new technologies, with a high efficient standard, with a certain social commitment, with spaces for communities and gardens for communities. And we normally didn't give much. We didn't give more than 7 or 8% of the overall investment, private investment to the investor. It's not so much, 7 to 8% of the whole investment. But together with the label International Building Exhibition and together with all the PR and marketing stuff we did, and where Anke Hansing is responsible for, that was so attractive for them that, for example, huge firms like Velux, I don't know if Velux is known in the US, they produce windows, and they built a fantastic zero-energy house without any money from us, because the big firms didn't get any money, only the middle-sized firms and so on. But they were so eager to participate in the International Building Exhibition, and they use it so extensively. I'm sure then you have seen some paper magazines here with this house built in the International Building Exhibition, so that this is another tool to trigger private investment. So this is the third point. You have a certain amount of money available. That is not much in the field of real estate. 90 millions, not really much. But of course, in the field of public financing, it is much. But you can use it very smartly.
Wendy, kind of reaching out to the residential and tackling the residential aspect, you were definitely a pioneer in the location that you chose and renovated. Can you share a little bit, just very quickly, about your experience and maybe some of the lessons learned, but also, I think more importantly, what is it that you're hearing from the residents about what they want to see as far as making the area more livable, more desirable for them to continue to stay there?
Okay, well, just to start with a little background and my relationship with the Howard Street corridor, back in the mid-90s or so, when the whole idea of having an artist community was first hot, there was a project that was planned called Artist Housing, and it was in the 400 block of Howard Street, where St. James Place, my development now sits. And another developer, Ron Russo, who Michelle Whaley, who's in the audience, knows, had actually put together a proposal. David Gleason was the architect, to come in and do artist live workspaces, and it was a very good plan. I came on board and was consulting with Ron Russo to actually do the project, and we were working on putting the financing together. And at the time, we had a very good state historic tax credit. It wasn't a competitive process. It was as of right, like the federal tax credit. And, it was just easy to get. However, as is always the case, financing was still a problem. It was just really difficult to, do an artist housing project without more subsidy. And we tried different things. We looked at perhaps using the low-income housing tax credit to try and do artist housing. We went to other areas. We looked in Rhode Island, it had been done. Minneapolis, it had been done. But in the end, as is the case a lot of times, the financing just couldn't work on the project. And after many years of trying, the property was pulled back, BDC pulled back the property, and the project known as Artist Housing was dead. So years passed, and then back in 2000, another RFP came out. And this time I decided to put together my own team to actually chase the block. And the whole artist housing concept was now gone. We came in with a great project. It was 77 units of housing. It was 6 of the historic buildings along Howard Street. We were going to do some new construction. We were going to integrate the different buildings with a series of courtyards. We worked very hard to try to pull that together. And then finally, in 2006, I closed on the financing, and the project was scaled back by 2/3. At the end of the day, it was just too expensive to try and to redevelop all of the smaller historic properties on the block. So then we opened our doors in 2008, right before the whole market imploded, and 2008 and 2009 was very difficult. But then in 2010, it's an interesting thing happened. There was a lot of demand downtown for housing, and since then we pretty much stay 97% occupied, and one of our residents is here. Thanks for being here, Dwayne. So in terms of being a pioneer, and what I see, it's interesting because we have a courtyard right on Howard Street, and so we had a cookout, barbecue on Sunday, which was very nice. So I took the opportunity to ask, the residents. We probably had like half the building turn out. I said, well, I'm going to be on this panel on Wednesday, and on Tuesday. What kinds of goods and services would you like to see in the area? I mean, what should I be talking about? And one of my young residents looked at me like I was stupid and said, what about an open store on Howard Street? So, really, and when you think about it, it is a silly question. I mean, what do residents want? They want goods and services, and they want the goods and services that they can use. They don't want, there's maybe too many wig shops or too many mobile phone stores. I mean, they want groceries. They want, things that they have to actually go outside of the area to buy. That's really what we see is that there needs to be a real focus on how we bring back, not only residential, because, residential is coming. And, so you do the upper floors as residential, but we also need that retail, those amenities to provide with residents, which is then going to fuel it even more, and I think bring more people downtown.
And I know both of you have discussed really how you attracted residents and retained the existing residents you did have as far as providing the amenities from an infrastructure, both a social and physical infrastructure. Are there any other things that you all really focused on as far as, and I think retail is a key element of not just the Howard Street corridor, but that entire Bromo district. Are there any things that either of you really focused on specifically in your projects, for the retail and for the services, any types of incentives you offered, or was it now that we have enough residents, the retailers kind of follow along behind that?
Well, in the major project like Hafen City, there are never enough residents to support the retail at the beginning, specifically when you have an area development with a significant ground floor, more than 300,000 square meters and 12,000 residents. It never works out in terms of balance. So you are depending on actually visitors and the working populations and quite a little bit more. So actually, what we do is also do a lot of support for the ground floor spaces. In the first place, as we are the landowners, we support the land price for the ground floor spaces, lower that on public land. It is even sometimes lower than the price for residential space, in order to bring that in and to support publicly related uses. Secondly, what we are doing is so that individual landlords do not become greedy, because they think the market turns already and the new potentially interesting tenants are coming, we are putting a price cap on the rent because we are supporting the land price. We say the deal is for 15 years, the rental price is limited to this type of rent. Thirdly, we are acquiring certain types of core tenants, for example, in the market. That is either retail tenants, but also entertainment, consumer-oriented business. So we are telling sometimes residential developers, you take this tenants, I have an LOI with me, and you bid based on this contractual offer for the land. So that is an important linkage. Fourthly, we are actually support the organization of retail tenants and other actors in the community themselves. We have roughly 100 now, but that is not sufficient. So we support them in terms of marketing. I have specialists in terms of organization. We provide linkages with a Chamber of Commerce, so to say. We set up app systems so that people are coming when they are visitors, that they perceive the jobs. Because the difficulty is where the new development occurs, there is no flow of people yet. There is a construction site. Yeah, it's a little bit different in Howard Street, but it has a similar background. So when you propose, so to say, retail, there is a lot of things you can do as a management-based organization, controlling the land and doing, so to say, the financing framework for everything. And you can set up a contractual framework and a support framework which allows retail and other related activities at ground floor to spread and to be very successful. Naturally, some companies still do not make it. Some misjudge the opportunities. Some voluntarily pay too much rent. Yeah? And all those things happen. Or sometimes they are not professionally enough and close on Saturdays when most people want to shop. But after all, this system helps to generate quite a successful basis for an urban character of the area, which is residential and a working area.
You refer to other experiences. I will give another experience. When I was at the International Building Exhibition in Berlin, 1984-87, we had thousands of vacant old buildings and apartments due to the fact that they were supposed to be torn down, because there was a demolishing ideology. Everything had to be built new. That is completely changed, thanks to God, today. But what happened was, and what we did in the IBA 1984-87 is, we supported squatters, and we squatted by ourselves as a public company. But we didn't squat in the term that we lived there, but we squatted in the term that we made the buildings what we called Winterfest. That is, that we protected the buildings against rain and freezing and so on. And walking around yesterday in Howard Street, especially Howard Street, all these empty buildings belonging to the city or to private, I think it could be interesting. I don't know exactly. I don't want to give a recipe, but it could be interesting to make the house to make a basis maintenance or a basis retrofitting, or I don't know the exact word, how do you call it in English, but to protect the house against the further deteriorating process, and perhaps to give the one or the other house to students. For example, when we started 2007 in Hamburg, there was a considerable rate of vacancy in old houses. And so it was agreed with the public company, the public housing company in Hamburg, but you could agree that as well with private owners perhaps, or if you are the owner by yourself, then you can agree it with yourself, to give the houses to a very good conditions to students. The students, because students normally suffer from housing shortage, and so if you combine those two things to bring it on a basis standard of quality, very, very simple, very, very basically oriented, and perhaps to combine it with self-help activities from certain groups. Maybe there are some jobless youth people that should be brought into labor and which can be consulted or assisted by an NGO or whatever, and they could be committed to make some basic construction labors. You can combine these both. So this is more a community-based approach. But in the case of the IBA, that was extremely important and successful, because several hundred of students moved to the area, and what happened? They founded a cafe, and there was a Portuguese student who founded a Portuguese restaurant on a very low price level, and suddenly the empty ground floors started to get filled with very simple uses, but with uses. That is so the goal of improving living perhaps starts on a very small level.
And of course, certainly, Charlie, what we'd like to talk to you a little bit about, obviously with your experiences in Station North, what role of the artists and the arts themselves in a district such as this, how do those really play into the economic development as they have in Station North, and certainly what we project hopefully happening here in the Bromo district?
I think that the arts and artists much more than the arts, can be important in any part of Baltimore that is cheap and is within walking distance of MICA. And this works in Station North, and it seems certainly to be working in Bromo. There are a bunch of young people out there. How many of you have been to something in the Bromo district within the last month? Yeah, that's a good sign. How about something in Station North within the last month? How about both? All right. Well, yeah. So I think there are some legs here. I think that there's a limit to the number of working artists that Baltimore is likely to be able to support in the next 10 or 20 years. And there's a limit to the amount of real estate that we can rely on artists and arts organizations to reclaim for us. But I think we're off to a good start. We certainly want to do something that you've tried to do in Williamsburg, which is to make artists not a transitional group of people, but to create places where artists can set down root, where arts retail and arts organizations can build communities and build markets. Very important. I would like to suggest, Nan and everybody else, several things that I've learned about the Bromo district and about sort of the West Side generally by listening to you. And I should mention that I went over to Hamburg 2 months ago, not knowing that this was going to happen, not knowing you guys. Wish I'd met you. I wandered around Hafen City in the rain, and all very, and was on a panel with a nice woman who had developed that artist's workspace building that you showed in Williamsburg. Great fun stuff. 3 things are jumping out at me. First, and this is a Hafen City lesson and a Williamsburg lesson, the importance of starting with a good strategy, a good spatial strategy. And here is something where I think, kind of without knowing it, we Baltimoreans might actually have been doing the right thing for the last 15 or 20 years. Because the Bromo district I think of as being in sort of not north-south along Howard Street, but 3 east-west districts. The easiest one to do is the east-west district south of Fayette Street, because you've got downtown on one end and University of Maryland on the other, and just 2 or 3 blocks in between, and it's fairly easy to make that connection. We've largely done that. Do any of you work for the University of Maryland? Well, God bless you, because the University of Maryland in the last 10 years has stopped being just a bunch of buildings in the middle of Baltimore and has become a distinguished urban place, has become a campus. You've really done a great thing, and it makes life a lot easier south of Fayette Street. The second horizontal band is north of Franklin Street, where you've got Mount Vernon on one end and Seton Hill on the other. And over the last 10 years, Mount Vernon and Seton Hill have been gaining strength, and now they're beginning to grow out. There's a lovely 171 unit renovation going on at Park Avenue and Center Street right now. So, you know, that will knit together. The hard part, Wendy, is where you are. God love you. The hard part is between Fayette Street and Franklin Street, where you don't have much on one end and you don't have much on the other. And so it's very hard to get any east-west movement. I suspect the best way to do it is to get things going south of Fayette Street, get things going north of Franklin Street, and then go boom, like that in between them. Go from north to south, but strategy, very important. Second thing is mobility. Mobility is utterly key. I mean, here we've got a part of Baltimore that has as much density as many parts of Manhattan Island. And if it's properly developed, it will have as much density as most parts of Manhattan Island. It is potentially a real big city place. And a big city place is a place where people need to feel comfortable walking, they need to feel comfortable biking, they need to feel comfortable riding buses, they need to feel comfortable on streetcars and subways, they need to feel comfortable outdoors. Raise your hand if you feel comfortable on Howard Street. Really? Wow, okay. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, but I've got my moments on Howard Street. And I think we cannot duck this issue, that if you go to the west side at almost any hour of almost any day, you will see dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who make most people uncomfortable. And we cannot duck that issue, because mobility is key to the construction of a great big city district. People need to feel comfortable outdoors if you're going to have retail, if you're going to have residents. In Hamburg, as far as I can tell, nobody worries about this. I wandered all over Hamburg at all hours of the day and night. Nobody cared about me. I didn't care about them. It seems to be the way it works. And the west side of Baltimore is not like that. And that gets to the third point, which is infrastructure. A large part of the west side's safety problem is created by its infrastructure. A little bit of a history lesson. Why were all the department stores at the corner of Howard and Lexington Street? The answer is because that's where all the mass transit lines from West Baltimore came together. And West Baltimore in 1900 was the middle-class heartland of the shopping public. Well, West Baltimore is now the poorest part of the city. And the transit lines still run where they ran in 1900. So the people who come to the west side for transfers are still the people who live in West Baltimore, but they are the people who make everybody else uncomfortable. I don't know what to do about that, but I know that something has to be done about that. Something has to be done about that if we want the west side to have mobility and to be a great big city district where people are comfortable doing it. So I don't know, that's enough.
For our Hamburg colleagues, any particular comments on the arts? I know you both have discussed how you did incorporate both the arts and the cultural institutions and the artists themselves. Any other specific items that you'd like to add about integrating these uses into the west side or into the Bromo district?
I think from our experience, there could be one more step to be reconsidered, because we think an important element is the temporary cultural activities in public spaces. And I think there is a joint approach which could be taken by developing public spaces on the one hand, increasing security on the other, and on the other hand, bringing in artistic performance, basically, not drop sculptures or something like that, performance into the public spaces. And some may be found in the area which are not working yet as public spaces, but which are residual leftover ones, which could be developed like that. And I think it should be an important potential target to come up with ideas with existing institutions, with existing players in Baltimore, to use those spaces which bring in different perception. I would agree that it is difficult to find a substantial amount of artists greater than the existing one, or maybe smaller, a small amount, but not, so to say, a fundamental amount, for example, taking 10% of the available space. That would be very, very unique on a worldwide scale already, coming up to that figure. So the interesting point is looking into the public spaces, and we have been, at least in Hafen City, very successful doing that with theater and a lot of other activities, so that a lot of companies and private institutions, non-profit institutions, came back with quite a number of interesting ideas. A literature festival was set up, a jazz festival was set up, and expanded basically from Hafen City into other areas of the inner city. So it is a dialogical process. Someone needs to start out and convince actors with regard to these activities. And I think that is a missing element where there is some significant potential due to the central location, due to the connectivity of this place, and which could, so to say, also be a starting point for the physical regeneration of the spaces in general, to make them more lively and usable for the people living there.
What we felt in Wilhelmsburg is that in promoting cultural activities, artists and so on, you have to be cautious as well, because in both sides, concerning both sides, concerning the side of the artist itself and concerning the existing population. Because concerning the artists itself, they feel themselves misused as a temporary tool. That's what you said. You have to give them the security that they are not a transition, only a transition factor, but that they are warmly welcomed for a long term, and that they are an extremely important factor of the community. So this is the one perspective. The other perspective is the existing population, because the existing population, of course, fears, they know that the artist scene is the first stage of gentrification in general. It starts with students and with artists. And the artists and the students are the first victim on the other side. That is the reason why it is so important to give them a long-term security. But regarding the existing population, of course, you trigger fears and people become anxious when they see that the artists are now the new welcome population, and their own needs stay neglected. And so you have to combine, and that's what we did with a project we call Kunst macht Arbeit. Art makes work. Is that right? I don't know exactly. You can. Yeah. So that we tried to combine artists, young artists from different districts in Hamburg and from Germany, with local initiatives dedicated to job creating and labor creating and so on, and the artists and the jobless people, for example, Turkish women, were addressed very strongly, because Turkish women are very they know very well in sewing things, and handwork and manufacturing and stuff like that. And we installed a cooperation. It's called Made in Fedel. Fedel is one of the quarters. It's the quarter with the highest share of Turkish population, 80%, of migrant population, 80%, and more than the half are Turkish population. And this project, Made in Fedel, is addressed especially to Turkish women. And artists and a very well-known fashion designer, Sibylla Pavenstedt is her name, from Hamburg. She has a very expensive label, fashion label. She works with these Turkish women together, and they made fashion shows, where the Turkish women are not the models, but they are in the background, and they are presented as well. Not only the models present the Made in Fedel collection, but the women are attending as well, and they are coming on stage and they say, "This is are the women who made it." So these are initiatives where you get a crossover effect between artists and the present population, and I think that is very important, not only to make an implantation of artists, but to create a cooperation.
Any other quick commentary before we take just a quick break?
I just wanted to go back to the whole parking lot issue, because that's a big one for me. So we have a surface parking lot adjacent to the building. It's about 39 spaces, and it is an absolutely critical thing, at least today anyway, on the west side. I mean, most of the folks in the building need their cars to get to work or to, do their shopping. We are not at the point on the west side where transportation can get you everywhere you need to go. Now, I'm somewhat biased. I grew up in New York City, and we really do have a transportation system there. And we talk about the red line coming, and I think it's going to be a great thing when it does come, but it's not going to solve all of our problems in terms of people needing their cars on the west side or in downtown. So, I think one of the things, and I agree, surface parking lots are not that attractive, and it would be better to have buildings there. So then we have to kind of figure out, so how do we do the parking? How do we do some sort of structured parking so that in fact, people can keep their cars and, will continue to want to come downtown. Because I think at some point you're going to have a mix. You're going to have the folks who say, no, I don't want a car, the millennials who are happy with trying to get around with public transportation. But then, I think at this point, probably 75% of the folks really do want to have a car and need to have a car.
I'll address that very, very quickly from two perspectives of what we've been working on downtown-wide, citywide, and certainly within the West Side itself in the Bromo District. And Brian could certainly speak to this at much greater length, Brian Greenan from the Mayor's Office, than I can, because I was not as readily involved. But there was a recent parking demand and existing parking study that was completed. And what we found is that parking exists in plenty. It just doesn't necessarily exist in the appropriate locations in all, throughout the district and throughout the area. As pertains to, and I believe if anybody does want that study and wants to review the points from that and the details from that, we'd certainly be happy to provide it, and I know Brian would as well. The other point being Transform Baltimore, which obviously Tom is the expert on, not I. But as part of our push for really rethinking downtown for the next 30 years, hopefully 30, 50, who knows, 100 years, with our new zoning code, we stressed very heavily that we didn't want parking requirements to be part of the zoning code anymore for downtown. Now, that does not eradicate the existing uses as they are today. But our hope as we move forward is that surface parking lots actually become a detriment for folks, and that the surface parking lots that do need to exist for certain reasons, because there are some that definitely do need to exist, quick in and out for certain uses, et cetera, are actually done in a way that they are significantly less of a detriment to the urban experience. So when you're walking along the sidewalk, you shouldn't walk along and just see a bunch of cars. You know, those need to be screened appropriately if that use is going to continue. So, Tom, I don't know if you want to just very quickly kind of touch base on that.
Yeah, thank you. We do share the view that surface parking lots are not a asset for the downtown area in and of themselves. And in fact, in addition to the requirements for beautifying those that will remain, we are proposing in the new code that no new freestanding surface parking lots be allowed to be established, so that we really are encouraging using other modes and getting creative about shared parking solutions, and using that inventory that does exist, but for whatever reason isn't being accessed by those who want it. I think we can make a good match. And the other piece I just wanted to toss out there that I didn't hear anything about mentioned was Lexington Market, and what I think what a key role a rejuvenated market could really play for the West Side, for both residents and bringing some more of those tourists and workers and everybody else to the district to spend their dollars there, and hopefully in other places as well. And we have the RFP out on the street, and we'll be selecting a consultant to help us go down that path of remaking Lexington Market in a positive and still genuine way, because everybody loves the history of the market and we don't want to lose that, but it needs some help to make it more attractive to a much wider audience, I think.
For those of you who know about the district in general and about the area as a whole, that area is really anchored not only by the University of Maryland, but also certainly by the market. And as Tom stated, both for good or for bad, it has its definite draw as an anchor in the district. So we're really looking forward to progressing with the changes that will happen there. And I think there's some really exciting times ahead for the market as well, some positively exciting. So with that, we're going to take a very, very brief, about 10-minute break just to give everybody a chance to stretch your legs, and then we'll be adding 2 additional panelists to just go over a couple of last topics. And then we'll do Q&A at the very end. Thanks.